Warning, this podcast may contain bad language and content that some listeners may find offensive, particularly the language.
Language is tricky. Parlez-vous français?
Are you just saying things now?
Yeah, I was trying to make out that I knew French, and I don't. We've done this before.
If I'm honest, at this point, anything beats Gary the Dinosaur. Welcome to Seesaw Podcast with T and Cleves.
Each week, offering up a blurry perspective on life. And he was a bisexual dinosaur, you know, for the kids.
Right.
And he might come back at some point, but not today. And welcome back to Seesaw for part 2 of our chat with Lance Johnson or John Stone.
Do you know what it is?
It's Johnson. But that's a Simpsons reference that if you got that, you're a nerd. You're a fucking nerd.
I didn't, and I'm a bit of a Simpsons nerd, so...
Yeah, that's just such a throwaway line. It's not even a funny line. It's just one of those throwaways. It was on the telly the other day.
Okay.
Yeah. So how's things, Cleves?
Not too bad. Warm
Busy.
as per.
Yes.
How about you?
Not too bad. Warm as per. Also, I'm exhausted because I just had a weekend of hosting some people from down south and then my parents. So I am tired, carrying like a 4-day hangover, feel crap quite at like disgraceful food. And,
Bringing positive vibes. That's what I'm hearing.
It was a great weekend. Well, 4 days. It was great. But like now, my body's like, you're an idiot. Like, come on. You ate out for every single meal. And in between that, you were just drinking.
You could have eaten healthily and had a Coke.
I could have done. And I could have also have not been a man.
Wow.
And I don't say that in a derogatory term. I say that in a redneck style. I'm a man.
The joys of language.
Yes.
Do you have any quick blind news for me this week?
Yes, I do. And I'm not doing the music. In classic T fashion of doing horrible blind news, a blind man in the UK was busted by a delivery driver with audio described child pornography.
I don't want to ask any questions about that.
I didn't read any more into that. It was just a horrible thing to hear, but it's like, okay, apparently that's a thing.
Here's my quick blind news. Blind person scores a basket. The crowd at her school goes wild. I don't know if it's news, firstly, and I don't know if it's a little bit patronising, but it made the news.
Do we know how many attempts they had?
Look, I dare say it was a lot, but I don't want to comment.
Well, there's things that it was like 100 attempts, and then they just took the one where they actually nailed it. The crowd are more happy about the fact that it's ending.
Most likely.
Well, that's much cheerier than mine.
Yeah. Mine
was horrible.
And that was quick blind news for the week.
Yes, it was. So yes, part 2 of our discussion about language with Lance of the See Through podcast. Sweet name, bro. And
what? Didn't sound patronising at all.
You know that I don't do patronising. I just have a voice. So yes, second part. Hope you enjoyed part 1. If you haven't heard that, go back, listen to it. Even if you have, go back and listen to it again. Bumper them together and be awesome.
Yeah, this discussion pretty much follows on straight where the last one left off.
There you go.
And if you want to watch it all in one go to YouTube. This is another thing I've wondered is who decides on the time limit for artists such as Lizzo or Eminem, right? Eminem's released a lot of stuff to date, hasn't he? And a lot of the stuff that he's released up until this point is going to have words now that are no longer deemed acceptable by the majority of society. Should he go back and change all of those songs? What date and timestamp did someone put down that went, actually, no, you're not allowed to use that word as of this date, as of this time?
Isn't it a time capsule as well? If we're talking about that, shouldn't they be preserved to maintain the culture and where culture was at that time? If it's acceptable at the time, you should be able to look back and say, okay, that was accepted as a piece in history. It's like with anything. Like, we could look back over history in many ways and like, okay, radical thing, but at one point slavery was acceptable. Does it mean that we go back and remove all things to do with slavery because it's now not acceptable? Well, no, we don't, because we want to preserve that history.
Now, isn't it? They tore down that statue. So they have been removing it.
But
Confederate flag is no longer deemed acceptable, is it? They took that down.
Yeah.
At the State House.
There's got to be some form of preservation, I think, so that it's like that expression, those who don't acknowledge the past are like destined to repeat it. I'm not saying you have to have like statues of Hitler in Germany.
I'm not saying celebrate it.
I'm not saying celebrate. Yeah, not celebration, but you can't brush it to the side and be like, oh no, we can't acknowledge that, because then you just have a generation of just babies who can't do anything and can't get offended about anything. They don't know anything. Downfall of the species.
You know what this reminds me of? Like, is DMX, the rapper. Like, he passed away recently. So then I went and like listened to some of his songs, and it was like so many homophobic.
You lose your mind up in here.
But he has so many like homophobic lyrics. And I was just, I wonder, I was just like, man, this guy would have never been anyone today. And it's just like, it's crazy because he had such success, but if he were to come up today, it wouldn't have happened, or he would have been more underground, but it's like, and it's like, if like a Gen Z kid, like listened to DMX's album, their head would have exploded, like. So it's just weird. Like, I think there are levels of, like when we were growing up, we were used to kind of more harsher language, and there wasn't really much you couldn't say. And now it's like, and I think that's what happens is it's like, well, I never could say, I always said this growing up, and then sometimes I learned like I remember I cut out, like growing up, it was common for people to say like, oh, as like if you didn't like something, or you would say that's gay.
Yeah.
Remember that? Oh, that's gay, man. Yeah, that's gay. And I want someone listening to try to say that that's not normal, because that was normal where I grew up, at least. I'll say that. And I'm pretty sure it was normal most places. But at a certain point, I think I was like, I can't remember what age, it clicked with me. I'm like, oh, I'm using that in a negative way. I just changed the word. And that was no big deal, but it clicked with me. And sometimes you have those moments where you just realize, I don't want to use that word anymore. And that's fine. But you if you were to like listen to, let's say, for example, Twitter, back when we were kids, we didn't have Twitter, but if we did, that would have been all over Twitter. That's gay. That's gay. That's gay. So then are you going to cancel me for saying that's gay when that was what everyone else said at the time?
It was acceptable at the time. Yeah.
So
the thing about it is, I didn't even think of it in the sense of it being homophobic at the time either.
Exactly. Yeah.
As a kid, I just thought that was just another word for rubbish.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's originally meant like happy, didn't it, as well? So when did that become a term for gay people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just changes over
Definitions change. They do. Like, if you look at the word fag, it was originally for a bundle of sticks. There was a derogatory term for homosexuals. Then, as South Park put out there, which is true, kids started appropriating it for anyone who was a bit ostentatious, a bit sort of showboaty. But then in the UK, a fag is a cigarette. You can go to any pub in any city and there'll be a bloke asking another bloke outside, or any gender, saying, excuse me, you got a fag?
Yeah.
And it's not a derogatory thing. It's just the terminology of the UK. It's like, it's still used now. Does it mean anything to do with like homosexuality or the LGBTQIA plus community? Absolutely not.
Congrats on remembering all of those.
Yeah, I was impressed with that. I was like, ooh.
Yes. Nailed it. I'm probably out of date now, to be fair, though.
Yeah.
But it does
change. You're missing at least three letters, I'm pretty sure.
But no, absolutely. Like, it's like words, they do unfortunately have power to some people, but culturally, they can mean radical things. It's ridiculous, like how much sort of like culture dictates this. Like if you go to Glasgow, don't call someone a cow. It's fine. You know, you see soap operas in the UK use that, like, oh, you cow. So like that, like a bit of a heifer.
Yeah.
Glasgow, that's probably one of the worst things you can say to someone. It's really bad word for some reason. But should you not say it on media because you might upset Glaswegians? No, I don't see an issue with it. Like you can't protect everyone.
Yeah, you can't protect everyone.
No, it's half the battle.
Yeah, thanks, G.I. Joe.
Yeah. Well, you know what's a good example of this, and I think you guys would find it fascinating, is like I recently, in my last episode, I talked about the M word. And I've had a few people on my podcast, you know, who live with dwarfism, and they've kind of explained it to me. And then so I noticed that, you know, Matt Walsh, you guys might be familiar with Matt Walsh. I don't know how familiar you guys are with him, you know, from the Daily Wire.
Yeah.
But he did a little piece on his podcast talking about, he was confused as to like why he can't say that word. He chalked it up to modern day woke PC police basically are the reason behind it. And then I did some research and found out that it's kind of always been an issue. It was changed in the 60s. So I made a video about that, explaining it like, hey, not everything is like a part of just like cancel culture, the PC police, that's not the reason behind everything. And I wasn't necessarily like going after him, but I think some people perceived that I was. And it's just like, it's any kind of restriction of language is going to be, no matter if it's logical or not logical, it's going to be grouped in as woke leftist politics in this day and age. And I'm learning that pretty easily. And I predict as time goes on and more people get outspoken about it, advocating for the disability community is going to only be something that is considered leftist. And I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good thing because it should be universal, right? But I think the right is grouping it all in as one thing, you know, like they're grouping like Kamala Harris with her blue suit description. That followed her pronouns. You know, she said, and then she said her description of her suit because she was trying to appease, you know, the blind and visually impaired people where she was talking. And then what happened was the right was like, look how ultra woke she is because she even described her suit after her pronouns. And I think it's unfair. I just don't like that direction of the perception of things. Just like, accessibility, it should be universal, but I think it's the more and more, you know, Lizzo gets canceled or Beyonce or whatever, the more and more these things come up, the more and more the conservatives are going to connect the dots and group it all in with Democrats. And then it's going to make it an uphill climb. And it's just going to be like, it's weird. And that's what I predict happening. I think the more and more that people are outspoken about language and things like that, the more and more of a divide it's going to make between the non-disabled community. And it's already a huge divide between disabled and non-disabled. But I think when you start making disability culture, you start making that exclusively a progressive liberal thing, it's going to be very problematic. And I don't think it's going to be good for the community in the end, I think it's disgusting with that,
with the blue suit thing. The fact that someone's trying to gone out their way to actually try and make it accessible, and there's people jumping on that, just being like, "Oh, like was it all through woke?" Basically, and you just think they're trying. Why are you getting on the back of this as if they shouldn't be trying?
It's because they're not, isn't it? I think that's what it is. Like, because then they could be called out, like you're not doing that. And it makes them look bad. It's moving the goalposts of what is deemed accessible, and acceptable.
But it's the fact that they're sort of trying to tear down people that are doing that rather than applauding them for doing that. And I'm not saying everyone has to do it, but that should be something that is seen as progressive. I don't really have a problem with that. If not all people do it, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that either. But the fact that someone's doing that should be applauded, not people getting on the back of it saying that they're too woke. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that was my point. It's just like, it wasn't a woke thing, but it was grouped in as something. It was perceived as something that was. And I think that's unfair. And I think that's happening a lot now, just because of the current political climate with woke culture and pronouns and identifying and the ableism, that word being so popular, fat phobic, there's something for everything. And it's like, oh, another descriptor I have to use. That's essentially what happens. Oh, now another thing I'm expected to do, and I don't know. It's tricky. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard.
Just going back to the language thing, do you think it was better in the 90s where arguably no one really gave a shit about what words you used? Or, well, actually, that's a bit of a sweeping statement. I imagine a lot of people did. That's why we are where we are now. But where it was all like sort of freely used, if you like, to the point that everything was up for grabs and you could use what you want. And to an extent, the words had less power as opposed to now where we don't say stuff. But if it is said, then all of a sudden it's a fucking massive deal. I'm not sure which side of the coin I'm on that.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think, this is the best. I don't know. I was about to say this is the best time on earth to be alive. But in terms of like technology and health care and what's available, but then we also have like global pandemic and all that. So maybe recessions and global warming, all that. So it's the future's not looking that bright. So I don't know. To be honest, I think having a thicker skin is a good attribute to have.
I don't know whether that's dying out though. That's my kind of.
I'd say some people skin people's, but it's like some people are getting softer, man. I think a large part of the population is getting a lot softer, and instead of letting some insult offend you and you have to deal with that personally and just letting it roll off of you, I think sometimes they make it like they try to make it a movement.
Yeah.
And then they get as many people on board as possible. And then when they have enough people screaming, eventually you'll hear them, even though they're, like you said, a very small part of the population. And this is how I look at it at the end is like, there are so many bigger problems going on that the word Lizzo uses in a song. I don't even understand how that's even in the news.
Yeah.
And I don't even understand how some of this is even topical with what's going on out there in the world. Like literally I feel like the world could end. And let's worry about Lizzo. It's just ridiculous to me that that's even a thing.
You have to have something to break up about the Russia-Ukraine war, right? You need other news.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I hear my dog. She's dreaming.
But no, absolutely. Like it's a difficult one. I'm not going to say that words don't have power. They do. Yeah. Atrocities have been born on the back of words. They can incite violence, and they have incited violence. But now we're in a society where we all have, I would like to think, in a majority of cases, a level head. And with a bit of a thick skin, you can just shrug things off and go, okay, make that distinction of something that's said in hate and something that is said through a lack of education. Educate those people, but they shouldn't have to adapt what they've done previously. Because I'm very much, I'm an advocate of you can't blame someone for what they have done. We're all stupider in the past because we know less than what we know now. So you can't be held to account for everything that you've done. I mean, if you killed someone, you should be held to account, let's be fair. So not a sweeping statement to condone, doing things. But when it comes down to these instances, you can't be held to account for everything you've said previously. Like that's such a dangerous thing because you're a different person to that idiot you were before.
If you focus, and I think about this all the time, like if more people are more selfish and just focus on themselves, there would be so many more successful people. It's just like, and I envy people like that sometimes. It's like some people are just like, I'm going to do what's best for me and my family. And that's all I care about. And I go to work, I come home, I do this or that. They're not even aware of little trivial things like Lizzo and all that.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. Like, just focus on yourself. How can you improve your life? You know, how can you adapt to your disability more? How can you improve your employment? Like, practical things that will help your life. Changing those things is going to make your life 1,000 times better than canceling a word. And it's just like the priorities are wrong. Again, it's like, let's focus on that word in that song versus the lines about castrating men. You know, let's focus on, you know, what the themes of most music talk about, how sexual lyrics are now. Like, think about the song WAP. You know, like, that's cool, but you can't say, you know, this. Where are our priorities? Sometimes I just think the priorities are all skewed in the wrong way. And it's just focus on yourself and learn how to make your own life better. It's just like, you'll be so much happier. And then you won't get so offended when you hear something, because you should almost expect it, with the age of the internet, with the history of the earth and how humans have acted to each other over time. Like, what do you expect? Like, we're terrible to each other.
Yeah.
We're terrible to each other. Do you expect there to be peace and harmony ever? No. Like, I just like, sometimes I just think people's expectations are too high. And it's just like, nah, dude, it's just like, you got to do what's best for you. Like, at the end of the day, too many people are selfish. It's like people spending all their time on Twitter or protesting or whatever. It's like, use that time to benefit go exercise, you know, read a book, apply for a job.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, there's practical things that just people don't do. It's almost like it's almost like, well, it's justified if I'm fighting, you know, I'm a social justice warrior, I'm going to change the world. I don't need to do all that other stuff because I think the fact that they think they're changing something for the better justifies them being on their phone and computer all day. When it's like, it doesn't. It makes you just like, I don't know. It just, I think it makes you dig a deeper hole for yourself. And then the more and more you get into that path, the more you're going to get sucked into that world. And before you know it, you spent the last 4 years online and nothing's changed.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I will just drop the bomb that there is a product in the UK called Midget Gems.
What's a product
that they are a candy.
Yeah, they're little fruit sweets.
Little fruit sweets. And they're called Midget Gems.
And I think, like, in that sense, like, it works, right? In that sense, it works because it's describing a candy, right? And the word means small, right? So technically, that's fine.
Have changed it. Some suppliers have changed it. Others have not.
Okay.
I tweeted a picture this week of a company that has not changed it. And it's like, okay, I don't know how to feel about this.
Well, what is your opinion on, what are both of yours opinion on the M word? Do you think it should be, you know, I'd like to know what you think about it.
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because I don't have dwarfism. So I've not been I've not had people maliciously call me that shit, basically. Yeah. But when people similarly say, I don't know, derogatory, what they think is derogatory things about a blind person, I don't know, you know, even at school, you know, when you used to have kids going, oh, 4 eyes, that kind of shit. Like that kind of stuff makes me laugh now. And I just think I'll quite happily own those words. You know, I'm one of these people that will take them back and prefer to make them mine. And I'd prefer everyone to use them, to be honest. And just, I prefer more people to use them as much as possible to the point that becomes no longer derogatory. Like the gay thing. Whereas I'm not a big advocate of let's never say it, because there'll always be someone that remembers that word. I don't think words will ever completely die out. You know, in 40 years' time, there's still going to be people that remember the N word, aren't there? And now and again, people are going to drop it, and it's going to be big. Where I'm not saying use that all the time. Again, I can't say, because I'm not black, obviously, what that's like. But speaking from my own experience of derogatory blind words, I don't personally have a problem with other people saying it. I'd much rather laugh it off and start owning that stuff.
I agree. I think words, as I've said, have power, and by making them taboo, you give them more power. And there are obviously exceptions to that.
Yeah, I mean, the blindness isn't backed by hundreds of years of slavery, is it, to be fair?
No, it's not. And there's derogatory terms that have been used to oppress people and incite violence in the past. And they historically should always be sort of like guarded as not being appropriate.
Yeah.
But we're in a new age now, and I think we're at a point where we're mature enough as a species to be like, okay, do you want to give that power? Like ableism, hate it as a word. We don't need a new word. Like it's not something that we require.
Discrimination will do.
Discrimination is fine. It's been around for years and years and years. People know what it is. But it's like you don't need a new word to define something. Like you don't, because you're giving more power to words for no reason. It's difficult, and especially when the minority, unfortunately, are getting their way on a lot of these occasions. They are getting their way, and that's a slippery slope because, like I said, those who like the cancel culture for Lizzo, was that a majority of the CP community? I imagine 95% of them didn't care. They didn't give a shit or didn't know about it. But why has art got to be changed for the minority who are offended? So it's a tricky one. Words have power. You don't have to give them power. Especially
with the particular example of art, you just don't have to listen to it or don't look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's free.
If it offends
technically.
you. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. You know, if it offends you, then don't keep going back to it.
Yeah. Move on. There's something out there for everyone now. So.
Yeah. And then, you know what? It's like a loud, motorcycle driving by, but there, the word ableism, right? And it's kind of, I think that your feeling of it kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier, where it's all grouped in now as like with leftist language. Most people who are calling out ableism and using the word ableism are progressives. So now people associate that word with that group. Yeah. And my point is that the word ableism it's a useful word. It's very it's in terms of a word with the definition. It makes sense that, that word exists. You can say discrimination too, equal value, but it's like ableism, it's just a descriptor, this describes this, but since it has these connotations as used by this specific pocket of the community, now it has this new eye roll kind of feeling. You hear it and you just instantly are like, oh, here we go. I think certain people are ruining the perception of but people are going to think, oh, anyone who stands up for anybody with a disability must be a liberal. And I think that's bizarre to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it gets dangerous, because it shouldn't be that way. And I think with the power of words, right? It's like, it's not really the word I think people get mad about. It's the aggression that can kind of come with it. It's like, if you're using it, like it's like why they're saying it, the reasoning behind them using the word. It's like them thinking they're better than, or thinking less of the person by using this word. I think that knowledge, like words just kind of showcase superiority. And I think that's where people get offended. It's like, you think you're superior to me? And I think that's where, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's just a word. But I think where people get offended is the feelings that are the reasonings behind them choosing to use that word. And I think that's where it can get kind of complex. It's like, if you innocently use a word, right, you don't know any better. You're going to be able to, if you have good social skills, figure that out. Mm-hmm. Oh, they said that innocently. But if they say it, harsh in it with intent, you're like, ooh. So I think there's a difference. I think it's all about how and why it's being said versus the actual word being said. And I think the Lizzo change, again, she was innocent with how she used it. She wasn't trying to be derogatory. And then to treat it as if she was just because you used the word, I think that's wrong.
But you can't even say it in context now. We've avoided the word the entire episode.
Exactly. And that's part of cancel culture. It's like, I did that video on the M word and I kept saying the M word. And it felt silly, but then again, I don't want someone to make a supercut video of me just saying it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Like they did with Rogan with the N-word,
No,
So
absolutely. Well, language is tricky. There's your summary.
it is tricky, man. But I think it shouldn't be as tricky as it is. And I think people overcomplicate it. I think it's all about intent. I think.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great to have you, man. And getting your thoughts on this, because you're sort of like posting on this a fair amount. And people, of course, can find you on YouTube, See Through Podcast. Go and have a look. You do great work. Long form content, short form content, anything you want. But before we sign off, is there any social handles or plugs you want to throw out?
Yeah, you can follow, the See Through Podcast on social media. The handle is at See Through Pod, and that goes for all platforms. And then also the Seesaw Podcast will be on the See Through Podcast. So keep an eye out for that. So you'll hear this interview, but in reverse.
Fantastic. Well, awesome, man. We'll get you back next time. We've got some other shows that are, topics. We've got topics.
Yeah, it's fun.
Different shows.
I just like to run through stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's good to just have to bounce ideas off people, man.
Yeah,
it's fun, man. I like this kind of topic. I like kind of being able to think about all the layers to things. I think that's also a reason why I think doing this podcast is fun, because I find myself, and probably the same with you guys, you have differing opinions sometimes.
Yeah.
And then you like to kind of analyze, they're like, well, why is my opinion different from the majority here? Yeah. And just kind of analyzing that can just be fun sometimes,
Yeah. Well, Clee's a dumbass, that's why.
Wow.
Well, amazing. We'll get you back on, man. But thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Awesome.
See you soon.
And we're back. Again, thank you to Lance, or Lance, depending on what part of the UK you're from. It was great to have him on to talk about language and how it is a dangerous place to be.
Especially if you're a musician, it seems. That and candies.
Yeah. Mini gems, mate. It makes sense still, doesn't it? But no, it was great to have Lance on. As always, you can find all of the links in the show notes. So go there, or go to the website, go to this episode on the website, and you will find it all written down there. Because I know some podcast players do not have show notes. So, yeah.
See you next week.
Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, that's all I need.
Sweet. Okay. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Seesaw Podcast.
You can find us on Twitter at Seesaw Pod, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram and YouTube at Seesaw Podcast. You can also email us at seesawpodcast@gmail.com. Like, rate, review, subscribe, and then you can also find us on TikTok, but get us on all the other places. This podcast was recorded in front of a blind audience.